Thank you very much, Ambassador Dlomo, who is our program director today, former President Thabo Mbeki and Mem Zanele Mbeki, Professor Anjina Pahad and the entire Pahad family, former ministers of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, my predecessors, Minister Dlamini Zuma, and also former Minister Sisulu, and other former ministers present that I might not have seen. The Deputy Minister of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Elvin Bottas, Deputy Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, Deputy Minister Holomisa, our partners, Ambassador from Norway to South Africa, Ambassador Sietha, all ambassadors who are here, who have joined this occasion, and all other former ambassadors who have also joined us today. Esteemed guests and all officials of the department who are also here, some of them, colleagues and the media fraternity that has also joined us today. Good morning to you all, and we welcome you all to the launch of the inaugural annual Aziz Pahad Peace, Security and Human Rights Dialogue under the theme, Constitutionalism as the Foundation of the Nation's Building and Social Cohesion, a reflection on 30 years of freedom, equity and justice in a post-apartheid South Africa. I am delighted to welcome you here at DERCO and to this important dialogue taking place today. As we gather here today at this moment in history, we must guard against the erosion of what the 1994 moment presented. Moreover, I believe that our generation must deepen the foundations we have inherited from the previous generation's stalwarts, such as former Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad, a true servant diplomat, known otherwise as the insurgent diplomat, as the title of his biography suggests. Aziz Pahad will be remembered together with his comrades of the decade, was a man of deep conviction and principle. He was steadfast in his belief in anti-imperialism, anti-racism, and the protection and promotion of non-racialism, genuine partnership and not paternalism, solidarity instead of unilateral enforcement, multilateralism, and genuine international cooperation. Just as we stand for peace and peaceful settlement of dispute and conflicts, we hereby give credit and notice that we were socialized to this belief in these cardinal non-negotiable principles by Aziz Pahad and his comrades, under the leadership of the then Minister, Dr. Dlamini Zuma, President Mandela, and Mbeki, and what was described as the Renaissance Coalition. In Aziz Pahad were the true progressive internationalists. All of us, including all members in the Government of National Unity, despite our different political persuasions, must pursue, as did Aziz Pahad, with deep commitment, the goal of transforming our country into a non-racial, non-sexist, and a united South Africa. With those who hold different views and perceptions, perhaps we must deepen consensus building through dialogue and negotiations. The GNU also took leave from this strong foundation when we declared in the statement of intent of the GNU, and I quote from the statement of intent, "Foreign policy will be based on human rights, constitutionalism, the national interest, solidarity, peaceful resolution of conflicts to achieve the Africa Agenda 2063, South-South and North-South and Africa cooperation, multilateralism, just and a peaceful, equitable world." Close quote. This is from the statement of intent. It is therefore shocking that the DA will argue that we are just implementing ANC policy in foreign affairs, when they have agreed to the above in the statement of intent, and it is what we continue to implement. The Government of National Unity does not supersede the Constitution. The statement of intent itself commits itself to constitutionalism. It can't be that when we implement what is in the Constitution, in the Foreign Services Act, National Interest Document, and the National Development Plan, we are served to be acting unilaterally by the Democratic Alliance. We are implementing what is in the foundational positions and policy document of our country, which has been socialized, consulted by South Africans, and adopted. And that is what the Department of International Relations and Cooperation and the President of the Republic of South Africa continues to implement. Until we are told otherwise by South Africans, this is the path we will continue on. The foundational elements of redress are powerful, articulated in the preamble of the Constitution, where the spirit of justice resonates through its founding principles, and the human rights framework of the Bill of Rights. As a sovereign state, we will continue to pursue the transformative objective as recently outlined in the Bella Act, the National Health Insurance Act, and the Expropriation Act. The preamble not only serves as a guiding beacon for our quest for restitution, but also embodies a new set of values and a commitment to building an inclusive South African society, one that honors the dignity and the aspirations of every individual. We must not fall for the simplistic idea that after 6 electoral cycles, we should abandon the premise that we have inherited 2 nations in one. One was white and prosperous, and the other was black, stratified along tribal lines without any economic agenda. This is a quest we need to change in this constitutional epoch. Organizations like the AfroForum and their ilk, who pursue a different path to that of our Constitution, do not only stand against the reconstruction of a new South Africa, they also stand against the will of the people. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not just to our Constitution that we should remain unwaveringly committed. We should also own the African constitutional normative values and architecture, from the Constitutive Act of the African Union to the AU, the NEPAD framework, and the African Peer Review mechanisms, the Africa Peace and Security Architecture, and the African Governance Architecture. Aziz Pahad will have expected nothing less from us. During the transition phase that set the contours of the new democratic South Africa, many of our leaders played an instrumental roles in conflict resolution, mediation, and negotiation, the country's post-apartheid future, but they simultaneously played this role in the continent and further internationally. This was the legacy of those negotiations, which was both a learning experience for all involved and a human experience in building trust and confidence. Our generation can only learn and imbibe from this historic wisdom. Aziz Gulman Hussein Pahad was part of that legacy. Deputy Minister Pahad was a dedicated Democrat who fought for freedom as a stalwart of an anti-apartheid movement in exile. He was a sharp thinker, a deceptively fierce debater that could disarm you with that infectious smile, a careful listener and a radical warrior for justice, but also a pragmatic negotiator. A stalwart of the global anti-apartheid movement, his name is easily recognized and mentioned amongst the global anti-apartheid activists. As the longest-serving Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in a democratic South Africa, Aziz Pahad played a very active role in South Africa's mediation efforts and confidence-building measures under the SPICE process, when the Israel-Palestine peace process was navigating its way through the post-assassination period of Yitzhak Rabin. More importantly, in Africa, Aziz Pahad played an active role in the negotiations with the warring factions of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, and Angola. He always understood that resolution should be pursued through dialogue. As the South African government, we welcome the decision of SAMI DRC, or SADC, to withdraw SAMI DRC from the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, which will give space to a confidence-building measures for a ceasefire for a long-lasting peaceful resolution in the Eastern DRC. We're also pleased that the process is now being operationalized through the process of ceasefire engagements by the chiefs of the defense forces that will lead to the reopening of the Goma airport, as agreed upon by the chiefs of the defense forces with the M23. This will enable SAMI DRC to carry its equipments from the Goma airport, because it will have been difficult for them to carry some of these equipments through other areas. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, there were active armed conflict in at least 46 states in 2021 and in 2024, of which 18 were in sub-Saharan Africa. These statistics clearly reflect that there are too many areas of conflicts around the world, and Africa has got its own fair share of these conflicts, which mostly certainly do not contribute to stability, human security, and economic growth. South Africa is and remains a strong proponent of a peaceful dialogue to end conflicts. And this is a foundation and values that were strongly led by Aziz Pahad. In his speech delivered in Greece in 2006, titled Conflict in the 21st Century in Africa, Deputy Minister Pahad said, and I quote, "Globalization has brought the world closer, yet we are still incapable of living at peace with ourselves, with each other, and unwilling to eradicate the scandal of global poverty and hunger." Close quote. This powerful observation is even more relevant today as we navigate the conflicts on our continent and the attempted shifts towards unipolarity, nationalism over multipolarity, and entrenching diversity. The global governance system stacked against Africa and the global south was a major priority of Aziz Pahad, and ensuring the transformation of this opaque system was a key concern for him. As a result, multilateralism is part of the DNA of foreign affairs of South Africa. We can't change it even ourselves, even if we want to. But that the UN and its agencies and the UN Security Council has to be transformed is not even a debate. It simply has to happen. The primary objective of this annual Peace, Security, and Human Rights Dialogue is to bring together participants to share knowledge and experiences and encourage collective reflection on the requirements for building sustainable peace and advancing post-conflict reconstruction and development processes worldwide. One of Aziz Pahad's preoccupations was the abuse of power by the powerful states who believed that might makes right, and he was determined to constantly and consistently analyze the global balance of forces. He was meticulous in analyzing the war of terror after the September 2001 attacks of the US. He was just as distraught about the new scramble for Africa under the guise of Africa Rise, which he regarded as a cover for mineral extraction in Africa. For us honored guests, the issue of Africa's critical minerals will be on the agenda of the G20, and we will have to be as vigilant as Aziz Pahad was when he analyzed the new scramble for Africa. Aziz Pahad played a crucial envoy role in Iraq, and his commitment to self-determination of the Palestinian and the people of Western Sahara was indispensable. It is against this background that South Africa insisted on value-add at source and beneficiation and investment for the industrialization in our continent at FOCAC recently, and our recent engagement with the AU. We will continue in this trajectory in our trade engagements so that Africa should benefit in its own natural resources. We continue to value our mutual beneficial trade relations with the USA, and we continue to extend a hand to bridge our recently challenging relationship with South Africa. I know that there is a yearning from some amongst us that for us to show that we are courageous, we should be trading insult with other countries, ignoring all the firm and courageous positions that this country has taken on progressive internationalism. We are practicing diplomacy. We are not in the business of trading insults with anyone in the world. We will remain firm on our principled positions. We will continue to pursue our national interests in line with diplomatic decorum. If we disagree with any country, it should be on the basis of substance and not on the basis of insults. In recognition of the contributions and groundbreaking work of the late former Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad, the former chairperson of the Forum of the former South African ambassadors, I'm pleased to officially launch the annual Aziz Pahad Peace, Security, and Human Rights Dialogue. Our non-aligned posture, Aziz Pahad insisted, had to be consistently re-cemented and NAM had to be re-strengthened. This is especially true in the year of the 8-year anniversary of the non-alignment movement. It is against this background that we today, as the Department of International Relations, on behalf of the government of the Republic of South Africa, and also on behalf of President Cyril Ramaphosa, we launched this dialogue. We are hopeful that different views will contend, it will be robust, and we will get insights in terms of mediation and other matters. During the private engagements, I said to former President Mbeki, we know that him being here and during his robust engagements, in some of the inputs, they will put us in trouble. But it is our life to handle them and to deal with this. And we are hopeful that this dialogue will launch such robust engagements and help and propel the country to move forward. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. With that being said, done with the launch part of the dialogue, I now have the privilege and the honor to call to the stage our former President Mbeki to address this gathering. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Minister. I'm glad you've gave me the permission to be robust. But thanks a lot, Minister, Ambassador Angela. And thanks a lot to you, Minister, and to Welile for the salutations which you've done. I shan't repeat them. But thanks indeed to everybody for coming this morning. And thanks to Derko, to you, Minister, and Department of International Relations and Cooperation for the initiative to name this dialogue series after Aziz Pahad. I'm very, very glad indeed that we've decided to honor him in this particular way. If we take our three administrations of 1994, 99, and 2004, those three administrations, I'm sure Ngwazana will agree with me that the one person in terms of those administrations was most experienced in international relations was Aziz. He was indeed, in a sense, the expert on whom we depended for guidance with regard to these issues. I'm very glad also that we've decided to say something at this meeting about his book, The Insurgent Diplomat, because that tells a particular story, which is important. All of us will recall that the U.S., supported particularly by the United Kingdom, went to war against Iraq in 2003. We were very, very interested to stop that war before it broke out. So part of what happened is that Aziz had to engage Saddam Hussein on the issue of his cooperation, the cooperation of Iraq with the UN arms inspectors were led by the Swede Hans Blix. Because it was clear to us, watching at a distance, that not enough of that was happening, that cooperation. And indeed, Hans Blix was talking publicly about that. And to avoid this war, to avoid a war that would be caused by that, Aziz engaged the then President, Saddam Hussein, to convince him about the importance of cooperating with the UN and indeed dealing with that challenge, which related to weapons of mass destruction. And Saddam agreed. As a consequence of which, Aziz led a delegation to Iraq of the people in this country who had been responsible for dismantling our own nuclear weapons, and were also very, very familiar with what had happened with regard to the chemical and biological weapons. He led a delegation to go to Iraq to engage the Iraqis on this matter, whether they owned weapons of mass destruction. That delegation of Aziz Pahad wrote a report and said, in fact, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And that report was submitted to the UN Security Council. When the President George Bush at some point called me to say that he was very, very concerned about the possibility of this war and wanted to avoid it if he could, I said to him, there is a report at the Security Council which says there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And he should please access that report. I don't know if he did. But I'm telling you this story because just as an indication of the kind of serious engagements in which Aziz would get involved. And of course, as all of us know, when the war broke out and the search started for these weapons of mass destruction, and the result confirmed what Aziz and his team had said. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I'm mentioning also the Insurgent Diplomat, the book, because one of the things that it deals with is a period of 4 years which was focused on preparing for the transition from apartheid to democracy, in which Aziz was involved. The group of leading Afrikaners, academics, business people, leaders in the church, professionals, who I could say undertook a voyage of discovery. It was to talk to the ANC, to find out what is the ANC. What does it think? What is its view about the future of South Africa and all of that? They had to discover this because they had brought themselves up on a fake notion of what the ANC was. Aziz engaged in this discussion for 4 years, and they would ask questions like, when we say the people shall govern, what do we mean? Because in their understanding, we meant the ANC shall govern. That there would be an election, one election, the ANC would win and stay in power forever. So we had to explain all of this. We had to explain when we say South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. After all of these centuries of oppression by a white minority, what do we mean? Aziz was part of the process of explaining what that meant and what it would mean once South Africa was liberated. I'm saying all of this because I'm quite sure that Aziz would have been very shocked when he read this executive order, which was issued on the 7th of February by the President of the United States, which will recall what it said, that in shocking disregard of the citizens' right, the Republic of South Africa recently enacted the Expropriation Act to enable the government of South Africa to seize ethnic minority Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation. And it said this act follows countless government policies designed to dismantle equal opportunity in employment, education, and business, and hateful rhetoric and government actions fueling disproportionate violence against racially disfavored landowners. I'm saying Aziz would have been shocked to listen to that, because he'd spent so many years explaining what the ANC stood for and what it would mean for South Africa, what that would mean for South Africa when South Africa was liberated. That you could have a false statement like this actually propagated. But also Aziz would have treated that as a wake-up call. In this sense, that it indicated that it was as an imperative correctly to understand the world in which we engage foreign policy and international relations. To understand how any government could so readily accept a falsehood of that kind. To understand the world in which we engage in foreign policy and international relations. And therefore, Minister, on behalf of Aziz, let me ask some robust questions. Does DERCO understand the world in which it engages international relations for the people of South Africa? Does it have the internal capacity to develop this understanding? And in practice, what is done practically to get this understanding? Maybe Ambassador Loma, this is your responsibility. And what is done to relate policy to that understanding? I think these are very serious questions which Aziz would have raised, so that whatever we do, it's on a basis of a proper and objective understanding of the objective world within which policy develops, which might have explained why a falsehood like this claim about the persecution of Afrikaners, how that was accepted by an important government in the world. In this context, in that context of understanding the world, let me make some remarks about the United States. Earlier this month of March, the U.S. issued its annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community. And it's important to study and understand this, because as part of the need of understanding the objective world within which we operate. And the U.S. intelligence threat assessment. And among others, it has a section headed Major State Actors. And it says several major state actors present, proximate, and enduring threats to the United States and its interests in the world, challenging U.S. military and economic strength regionally and globally. China stands out as the actor most capable of threatening U.S. interests globally, though it is also more cautious than Russia, Iran, and North Korea about risking its economic and diplomatic image in the world by being too aggressive and disruptive. And growing cooperation among these actors expands the threat, increasing the risk that should hostilities with one occur, it may draw in others, unquote. This is assessment of the U.S. intelligence community about major state actors. That report also contains a section dealing with what is called transnational Islamic extremists. And it says ISIS's most aggressive branches, including ISIS Khorasan and its entrepreneurial portals, will continue to seek to attack the West, including the United States, via online outreach and propaganda aimed at directing, enabling, or inspiring attacks, and could exploit vulnerable travel routes. It says in 2024, the ISIS spokesperson publicly hailed the group's Africa expansion, highlighting the growing importance of the continent to the group. ISIS Somalia has doubled in size during the past year. ISIS West Africa remains the largest branch and leads in numbers of claimed attacks, and ISIS Sahel is expanding into coastal West Africa. It then says Al-Qaeda maintains its intent to target the United States and US citizens across its global affiliates. And Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda's largest and wealthiest affiliate, remains focused on attacks in Somalia that further its regional objectives, provides funding to Al-Qaeda efforts outside of Somalia, unquote. I think the legitimate question that arises from these quotations is, what are the implications for Africa of these assessments concerning major state actors and concerning transnational Islamic extremists, as the US intelligence report says? So far, of course, there is no Africa policy from the Trump administration. But in December 2018, which policy would have informed us about whether these assessments, intelligence assessment, have an impact in terms of US policy towards Africa? So I'm saying so far there isn't such a policy. But in December 2018, that's during President Trump's first term, Ambassador John Bolton, who was the national security advisor to President Trump, spoke about the Trump administration's new Africa strategy. And here's what he said. He said, we have prioritized everything, developing this new Africa strategy document, because we understand that lasting stability, prosperity, independence, and security on the African continent are in the national security interest of the United States. And he said, we want our economic partners in the region to thrive, to prosper, and control their own destinies. And he said, in America's economic dealings, we ask only for reciprocity, never for subservience. And second, countering the threat from radical Islamic terrorism and violent conflict. And he went on to say, great power competitors, namely China and Russia, are rapidly expanding their financial and political influence across Africa. They are deliberately and aggressively targeting their investments in the region to gain a competitive advantage over the United States. China uses bribes, opaque agreements, and the strategic use of debt to hold states in Africa captive to Beijing's wishes and demands, and continued that its investment ventures are riddled with corruption and do not meet the same environmental or ethical standards as US developmental programs. And he went on to say that Russia, for its part, is also seeking to increase its influence in the region through corrupt economic dealings. And across the continent, Russia advances its political and economic relationships with little regard for the rule of law or accountable and transparent governance. It continues to sell arms and energy in exchange for votes at the United Nations, votes that keep strong men in power, undermine peace and security, and run counter to the best interests of the African people. In short, The predatory practices pursued by China and Russia stunt economic growth in Africa, threaten the financial independence of African states, inhibit opportunities for U.S. investment, interfere with U.S. military operations, and pose a significant threat to U.S. national security interests. And equally concerning at this time, he says, the lack of economic progress in the region has accompanied the proliferation of radical Islamic terrorism and other forms of violent conflict across Africa. Countering these serious threats is the second priority under our new Africa strategy. And he says we'll focus our economic efforts on African governments that act with us as strategic partners and which are striving towards improved governance and transparent business practices. As our partner nations develop economically, they will be better prepared to address a range of security threats, including terrorism and militant violence, unquote. Minister, we do not know whether the current Trump administration will persist with these positions concerning what it has described as its strategic adversaries, according to its threat assessment. I've read this thing because it may very well be that they may take, the current administration may take what John Bolton said on behalf of the first Trump administration as a framework within which to formulate its Africa policies. If that is the case, Minister, the question arises, what does Africa do in the light of that? In 2022, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency said that terrorism remains an active, destabilizing influence, with Al-Qaeda's affiliated terrorist groups and ISIS gaining influence, and in many cases territorial control in the Sahel, in Mozambique, in Nigeria, in Somalia, and elsewhere on the continent. It said the Al-Qaeda affiliated group Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Musliman continues to increase attacks in Sahelian states, especially Burkina Faso and Mali, and to threaten littoral states. While ISIS Sahel is focused on rebuilding itself in Niger after leadership losses and attacks in 2020 and 2021. ISIS West Africa mostly defeated Boko Haram in 2021, incorporating many former Boko Haram fighters in the process, and allowing the group to expand its area of influence and continued attacks on regional security forces in the Lake Chad Basin. It said in Mozambique, ISIS Mozambique expanded operations, conducting deadly attacks and temporarily taking terrain that threatened Western economic interests in the oil-rich province of Cabo Delgado. And it said that in South Africa, ISIS elements have used the country as a conduit for illicit financial transactions. This situation, unquote, this situation described by the Defense Intelligence Agency of the US is not likely to have changed very much by 2025, except for the West. So the question arises, what do we do in the light, I'm talking about the continent, in the light of what Bolton said about countering the threat from radical Islamic terrorism and violent conflict, and the commitment he made that the US would intervene in Africa to achieve that objective? What do we do? Then another matter which was of importance relates to the global economy, raised in particular in the context of what the Trump administration has been saying about raising tariffs on many products. It raises a question, therefore not only of tariffs, but the economy. In terms of the economy, global economy, what does the U.S. the Trump administration think? Alistair Crook. Alistair Crook is a former British ambassador, belongs to a group called the Conflicts Forum. And in this regard, talking about the economy, he makes an interesting proposition. And he writes that the post-World War II geopolitical outcome effectively determined the post-war global economic structure. And says both are now undergoing huge change. And he says the U.S. has been forced into two major conclusions. First, that the budget deficit coupled with exploding federal debt finally has turned the resource curse back onto the United States. As the keeper of the global reserve currency, it has necessarily made America's primordial export to become the US dollar. And by extension, it means that the strong dollar, buoyed by a global synthetic demand for the reserve currency, has eviscerated America's real economy, its manufacturing base. And he says this is the Dutch disease, whereby currency appreciation suppresses the development of productive export sectors. And the dollar's global role contributed to the financialization at the expense of investment in the real economy. And says that the reserve currency, and consequently the strong dollar, has pushed, which is very interesting, has pushed many U.S. military supply lines out to China. And he said, the Pentagon says it makes no sense for the U.S. to depend on Chinese supply lines to provide the inputs to U.S. military manufactured weapons. And the U.S. administration has two answers to this conundrum. It's to weaken the value of the dollar and therefore to increase the value of the partners' status currencies. And he says the U.S. solution is to force the rest of the world to appreciate their currencies in order to improve the U.S. export competitiveness. And he says the second option is a unilateral approach. In this approach, a user fee on foreign official holdings of U.S. treasuries would be imposed to drive the reserve managers out of the dollar and thus weaken it. And he says a U.S. economic rebalancing is coming. And says Putin is right. The post-World War II economic order is gone. This analysis may be right or wrong, but I think the size of the issues it's raising concerning a country which can make still a major impact on the global economy are very important, and therefore emphasizing the need to understand the global economic objectives of the Trump administration. Alistair Crook said that Putin had, let's say, was right. The old economic order was on the way out, creating new possibilities. And he talks about what Putin said earlier this month when he addressed the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs. He was talking about Russia in the context of this economic world order that is on its way out. He said sanctions are neither temporary nor targeted measures. They constitute a mechanism of systemic strategic pressure against our nation. Regardless of global developments or shifts in the international order, our competitors will perpetually seek to constrain Russia and diminish its economic and technological capacities. And this, as I reiterate, sanctions and restrictions are the reality of the existing new stage of development that the entire world, the entire global economy has entered. The global competitive struggle has intensified, assuming increasingly sophisticated and uncompromising forms. But the so-called Western dominance is slipping away, and new global growth centers taking the center stage is a long-term trend, and I want to emphasize that. Yes, of course, we are fully aware of the advantages offered by our so-called Western partners, such as advanced technology and production process organization. We should keep in mind that growth rates in various regions of the world will remain stable over the next several decades. And the fact that we have, to a certain extent, refocused our priorities, not through our fault, by the way, due to a number of circumstances, may be a good thing. We are shifting our focus to global promising markets. All things that we need, we will get one way or another. Of course, he says, this long-term trend will remain unchanged. It will be bolstered up by, among others, the BRICS development platform that is currently taking shape. What Putin is arguing here is that despite all obstacles, essentially because the old order in the economy globally no longer holds, as Alistair Crook said, Russia will succeed. What's our reading, Minister, about this? Is the world order, the old order, the economic order, on the way out? Is Putin and Alistair Crook, are they correct? And where does that position us and position the African continent, if that in fact is a reality? Some have correctly suggested that despite this changing world, it is still necessary to make an objective assessment of the power of the United States, given its prominent economic, technological, and military standing globally. And in this regard, a US professor, Paul Post, wrote in January this year and said that some might question whether the US is still the world's hegemonic power or the key country that can shape and alter the course of international politics. If it's not, then Trump's behavior, while concerning, can be dismissed as the flailing of a declining power. But even if the US is still not hegemonic, much of the world, be it nations of the Western Hemisphere, residing directly in the US orbit, the network of allies that rely on the US protection, or international institutions that rely on US support to function, still view the US as a central actor in the world. Moreover, the US remains one of the few countries in the world with the power and resources largely to shape world politics in a manner that serves its interests. It would seem to be a wasted opportunity not to, unquote. The US professor Paul Post said this early this year. It was followed by another US thinker, Connor Eccles, who wrote under the heading, Trump's Power Problem, and said whether Trump likes it or not, this is now Connor Eccles, whether Trump likes it or not, the unipolar movement, that brief post-Cold War period of true American primacy is over, particularly in economic terms, and Washington's leverage is an easy resource to squander. Trump can get modest short-term wins by threatening sudden economic shocks. But over the long term, countries will try to limit their exposure to a volatile trading partner. And he said for most of the post-World War II era, America has used its status as a dominant global economic power to shape the rules of trade and hem in its adversaries. That power is still huge. But preserving it depends on a certain level of restraint, especially given all the other powerful states in the game today. The more that Washington hits other countries with sanctions or tariffs, the more it encourages other states to find ways to cut their ties to the American economy. And he says Washington's economic sword, once the world's sharpest, is growing dull through 1,000 mindless blows, unquote. Professor Paul Post himself concludes that the U.S. under Trump appears bent on fully leveraging its outsized position within the world's trade, security, and financial networks to coerce better deals. If others don't like it, they won't even be given the dignity of a kind word. The U.S., in Trump's view, has been played for a sucker and is determined to change all that. And he says Trump also strives in being highly transactional. And this will tilt the U.S. towards being more a predatory hegemon in the coming years, one that destabilizes and disturbs more than it comforts. But it also won't be fully outside the bounds of how the U.S. was long perceived by others, unquote. South Africa itself, of course, has been exposed to some action by the Trump administration. The challenge remains. With all these various assessments of what the Trump administration stands for, how should we relate to the U.S. under the Trump administration? In my view, not a very straightforward matter, but I believe that in this regard, the ECO must give us the lead. As Aziz insisted, we are seeing the emergence of a multipolar world, to which Anjana here referred. The issues we've been discussing are part of that multipolarity. And many were surprised when the new U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said during an interview on the 30th of January this year, and I quote, "So it's not normal for the world to simply have a unipolar power. That was an anomaly. It was a product of the end of the Cold War, but eventually you are going to reach back to a point, where you had a multipolar world, multi-great powers in different parts of the planet." He said, we face that now with China and to some extent Russia, and then you have rogue states like Iran and North Korea that you have to deal with, unquote. In the same interview, he said that the way the world has always worked is that the Chinese will do what's in the best interest of China. The Russians will do what's in the best interest of Russia. The Chileans are going to do what is in the best interest of Chile. And the United States needs to do what's in the best interest of the United States, unquote. It seems right, Minister, that inspired by what Marco Rubio said, we must also insist that Africa must do what is in the best interest of Africa. It is obvious that an important part it is obvious that an important part of what is in the best interest of Africa is its correct and timely positioning in the evolving multipolar world, so that the emerging global order places our continent in a better position to address its many challenges of the eradication of poverty and underdevelopment, of silencing the guns, of ensuring that the people govern and ending Africa's international marginalization. The serious challenge in this regard is that there is no evidence or sign anywhere that Africa's political and intellectual leadership is not only conscious of the need to define our continent's place in the emerging multipolar world, but is ready to act on this urgent matter. Given its performance, recent performance with regard to many of Africa's contemporary challenges, it is very, very doubtful that the continental body, the African Union, would be up to this task. This problem is compounded by the reality that over the years, the spirit of Pan-Africanism among our African political leadership in general has waned significantly, such that, to borrow a favorite Aziz expression, very few among these eat, sleep, and dream, while at the same time focusing on addressing the historic task of achieving Africa's renaissance. It would therefore be very opposite that as ZERCO is engaged in this inaugural process of honoring a giant thinker and practitioner in the field of international relations, Aziz Pahad, it should resolve to lead the process whereby our country, a member state of the African Union, would present to the AU a concrete program Africa should follow practically to define and find its rightful place in the emerging multipolar world. Thus, at last, would Aziz's dream be realized of ensuring that Africa interacts with the rest of the world as an equal among equals. I'm suggesting, Minister, that DERCO faces all these challenges as it understands precisely this world in which we live, to elaborate its policies so that the African continent engages its matters in a way that produces its results, positioned correctly in that multipolar world. And I really apologize that I did not have to, on your programs, it says, this keynote address must discuss the role of constitutional development in the South African nation building and social cohesion process, and the role it plays in foreign policy. I apologize that I did not have time to address this topic on our program about the role of constitutional development and so on. It must be addressed at some point. And in that regard, I'd like to say, more is nog 'n dag. Baie dankie.